if you go now to the chat rooms and the comment section on YouTube, whenever you see someone of African descent, or whenever you see someone of African descent in an English period film, you'll see that the first page of comments are about the film or the teaser trailer. All latter comments are about race. Oh, why have they included this African? Oh, why is this black person in there? Oh, is political correctness gone mad? Oh, and then it begins to take on its more sinister aspect. We should kill them. Immigration. Enoch Powell was right. Nigel Farage was right. Donald Trump was right. The French Front National is right. Jean-Marie Le Pen is right. Marie Le Pen is right. The Freedom Party of Austria is right. In my country, we kill black people. But it all started on the premise that we are not here and we have not been here. But if you prove that we were here, then that premise is removed. What you do is that you begin to lay a foundation which shows the limited application of white supremacy as a phenomenon. You begin to prove that white supremacy as a philosophy doesn't work. History is an important aspect in the shaping of our identity, but it should not be overestimated, nor should it be ring-fenced with labels that have been given to us by Eurocentric philosophy, which we may have adopted as our own. We might call ourselves Jamaican. Yeah, I'm a Jamaican, I'm a proud Jamaican. You might say this. Love it. Teach our children to be it, without ever knowing what that word means. Where does that word mean? Where does it come from? What's the origin of that word? You're calling yourself something you don't even know what it means. Oh, yeah, but I know I'm not British. Do you? Do you know what that word means? No, but I know I'm not it. Do you? So you know you're Jamaican, but you know you're not British. Even though you were born here, and your mother was born here, and your father was born here, but you know you're not British, but you know you're Jamaican. But what does the word Jamaican mean? I don't know. And yet you call yourself it. Or you call yourself Nigerian. Oh, I'm Nigerian. Do you know what that word means? Has it ever occurred to you that the word Niger means black? It's the same root word as the N-I-G-G-E-R word, which I don't utter. It's the same root as the word Negro, which most African people have rejected as a term of reference in reference to themselves. It just means black, but also it has negative connotations related to death and other things. And when you call yourself Nigerian, are you not also calling yourself all those other different terms as well? Or you say, I'm a West Indian. West of what India? When's the last time you were in India? That you should be west of it. Oh, I'm a West Indian. West of what India? The reason why the West Indies is called the West Indies is because certain explorers like Christopher Columbus were lost and refused to accept that where they were was a different continent. And so they called that place the Indies, the West Indies, and another place called the East Indies, when it has no relationship to India at all. And then you as an African call yourself a West Indian because a European who was lost references themselves by terms that didn't mean anything even to his generation. And so when you call yourself that, you expect not also to be lost. You are as lost as he is, or more so, because that was 500 years ago. The so-called Caribbean is not west. Well, it is west, if you look at it, but far, far west of India, and that's not how the term came about. So when we call ourselves West Indian, we've got to know what we're doing and know why it has those particular references and understand that we're calling ourselves a very confused term. So these labels that have been given to us are, for the most part, given. They are aspects, to a certain extent, of a degree of white supremacy stroke patriarchy that attempts to label those who have been subject to colonialism and neo-colonialism by terms and labels that are convenient for the master in their patriarchal white supremacy to feel comfortable with. After the Berlin Conference, after colonialism, and because of independence, those original Africans when they forged and tried to fight for independence, had an intention to collapse colonial boundaries, colonial borders. If you read very carefully Kwame Nkrumah, Nnamdi Azikiwe, Sékou Touré, Patrice Lumumba, and these types of people, you find out, number one, they had no intention that Nigeria should exist, no intention that Ghana should exist, no intention that the Congo certainly shouldn't exist. They intended that there would be a United States of Africa. That was their intent. And that the African identity would be the identity that all Africans in Africa had, from Cape to Cairo, although not to quote Cecil Rhodes. That was the idea. It was not an intention that people should say, I'm a Nigerian, I'm a Ghanaian, I'm this. What are you? That's not what it was about. It was creating an African identity forged in a global perspective. So, with that kind of thinking, it is very much lamentable that people of African descent don't have that African idea or that African identity. Instead, they say, I'm a Nigerian, I'm a Ghanaian, I'm Congolese, I'm this, I'm that, without actually understanding how those terms came about, or even perhaps even caring. In the so-called Caribbean, the situation is far, 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 far worse. Because in the so-called Caribbean, African people, for the most part, although not entirely, were brought there by Europeans and others for the purpose of being labor. The status, the position that they had initially were as Negroes. They had no citizenship within the nations of the so-called Caribbean. Their position was as labor. White people refer to themselves as West Indians. After independence, some Africans of a certain status in the so-called Caribbean began to claim the given state in which they're in as their own. This happened in Haiti, actually, probably before anywhere else. That class of people began to refer to themselves as, I'm a Haitian, I'm a Jamaican, I'm a this, I'm a that, or something like that. The lower class people still, for the most part, regarded themselves as African. Their practices, cultural practices, the ways of living were predominantly still African. The way that they did things had reference points to the cultures from which they came from. But the higher classes were trying to forge a new identity that in some ways was distinct. So the adage was passed down from generation to generation. Oh, we're not African. We've changed. We're different now. Even some ways perhaps superior. Oh, those Africans, they sold us. That's the reason why we're here. Because don't you know, Africans sold other Africans. And this is something that was perhaps told by the overseer and the master to the slave. The reason why you're here is nothing to do with us. Your people sold you. Yes, master. We believe it, just like we believe in Father Christmas and the Tooth Fairy and the Easter Bunny and all these other things. And that's all a damn lie. Sorry to tell you that Father Christmas, the Easter Bunny, all of that is a damn lie. So why should we believe the latter? Or at least believe the latter wholesale? So that's an adage that was told, and therefore the identity was forged by Africans in the so-called Caribbean became a separate kind of identity in a kind of myopic oblivion, cutting ourselves off from an African root, disappearing in an island, in an ocean. This meant that for many people, we became devoid of culture. Our status was only determined by what was happening around us. This was a mistake, and ultimately has led to the situation that we now have. So the children of the so-called Caribbean, and the children of the continent of Africa, and the children of the African-American experience, and the children of the other American experience, in other words, the South American experience, and the children of the African-Asia experience, and the children of the African Pacific, which is a different kind of experience, and the children of the African Oceanic tradition, and the children of the African European experience are for the most part devoid of their own African root. Even those Africans in Africa are devoid of their own African root. So this poses a very severe problem for people of African identity, especially when all the other peoples of the earth are forging forward on their own identity and yet also forging forward in the place in which they live. British Asian people are very, very British, but also extremely Asian. British people, wherever they are very British, but they are also of the place in which they find themselves. Donald Trump is particularly German/British American. His politics, his rhetoric is particularly German, British/white American. His root, his culture, his language, his speech is particularly German, British/American. The white English, Dutch South Afrikaners in South Africa, are particularly white English, Dutch Afrikaners. Their Dutch and English origin and German origin gives rise to a certain kind of politics, which only could be developed in South Africa. So the root from which they come from informs them in the place in which they're in. For all peoples. African people, by cutting themselves off spiritually from an African root, have lost the spiritual link that would enable them to survive even in the place in which they are then found. So by having no spiritual root, they're unable to develop the branches, trees, and leaf in the places in which they are found. They're unable to grow because they're a seed that's blowing in the wind with no root and no place. So when we say African, it's not to cut away from where you are. In fact, it's to enhance it. So genetics is also something that, if we can call it a science, is a science that for the most part has been used against Africans. It's a science that's come about from European and European American men who have tried to work out why things do and act the way that they do. People like Charles Darwin, before him John Frederick Blumenbach, before him Francis Berniers, even Francis Bacon in the 17th century. These people were trying to reduce nature to scientific calculus or scientific equations. Francis Bacon in the 17th century talks about the experimentation of science, the idea that there was something beyond what was written in the Bible. That the Bible only provided us with a theoretical religious understanding, but mankind, using Aristotle, Plato, or the science of Greeks, which we know comes from Egypt, but the science of Greece, to didactically separate and divide all phenomenon so that it can have a scientific equation. And by understanding the scientific equation, we could therefore understand how things work. And by understanding how things work, we can then predict how things work. And then we can change how things work. So I, for example, always talk about one of the early scientists in Europe that very few people talk about. His name is Capability Brown. Lancelot Capability Brown is a very important scientist, although he's not often spoken about as such. Lancelot Capability Brown, in the 17th century, wanted to design the perfect garden. He was a landscape gardener. And he wanted to figure out what makes certain flowers grow there and certain flowers grow there. Oh, I have white roses over here and red roses over here, but I want a pink flower. I want a pink rose. How do I get this pink rose? Oh, then I will mix the white with the red. How can I do that? How do I mix two flowers that are separate? So he began to mix. He began to think about genetics and work out equations for why things do the way that they do. And he did this in nature with gardens, flowers, shrubs, and things that grow. Charles Darwin, Origin of Species, applied similar philosophy much later on to why certain animals habit certain places. And why certain species resemble each other but are slightly different. Why is the tiger similar to the lion but different? Why does the mountain lion in certain parts of the America have a certain shape, but the lion on the plains of Africa have a different shape? He did this by studying birds, for example, in the Galapagos Islands. And he wanted to work out why particular birds have a shape of bill. Why is their beak shaped in a certain way? And he said, oh, this must be for reasons of survival. And that they have developed these characteristics step by step through selective breeding. He wanted to reduce this down to a scientific equation. He was not the first to do this. Someone such as Francis Bernier in the 17th century said that all of the human family owe their origins to particular colours. He traced this to the Greek theory of the four humours, that there are four humours and four colours: white, red, black, yellow. This theory is still with us now, and why people refer to themselves as white, black, red, and yellow. Of course, people aren't really white, black, red, or yellow. People may have a variation of colours, but they're not uniformly black, certainly not uniformly white, certainly not uniformly red, and certainly not uniformly yellow. So it's a nonsense. But the idea was that these four colours related to aspects of the human condition. And by tracing these four humours, you could work out the characteristics. So, for example, if you were red, you'd be hot, phlegmatic, and aggressive. If you were white, you'd be sanguine, etc. That's the idea. So these ideas gave birth to characteristics, the characteristics associated with the colour associated with a particular race. However, Francis Bernier wasn't necessarily about attributing positivity or negativity to any particular race, but merely to state that these are the characteristics associated with each particular race. John Frederick Blumenbach in the 18th century, who was a friend of Alado Equiano, that's another point which we don't have probably time to dwell on. John Frederick Blumenbach tried to make this into a science and said that the white race is industrious, creative, imaginative, etc. The black race is such and such, the red race is such and such, and the yellow race is such and such. These characteristics, he said to say that there are four distinct races, not one human race, but four distinct races, and that these distinct races have characteristics which are immutable. In other words, can't be changed. But if you mix the races, those immutable characteristics become mutable, changeable, because you produced, inverted commas, a hybrid. A hybrid being someone of various different ethnicities. However, the thinking of Blumenbach and Nietzsche, another German writer who's talking about the superior man, the creation of the superior man, which actually gave rise to Nazism, those people have failed to understand the human history even of Europe. Because even in Europe, people of African descent, Asian descent, and other non-white descent have been present for thousands of years. The genetic bloodline of these people are intermixed into the European bloodline. In the continent of Africa, not everywhere in the continent of Africa, but certainly in North, East, West, and South, that has also taken place in the continent of Africa. In America, the mixing has been continuous, and certainly in the so-called Caribbean, South America, Asia, Australasia, etc., that mixing has been continuous. There is no, inverted commas, pure blood. Probably never has been. The fact of this means that these characteristics, even if they did exist, are all mutable because of the fact of what has happened. But that's not necessarily what they were about. These categories and these scientific ideas were about creating superiority and inferiority. It was about creating the idea and justifying the idea of European colonialism and imperialism. It was about providing a scientific evaluation to support the religious one, to prove that the European through manifest destiny, John O'Sullivan, 1805, that the European was meant to inherit and rule the earth and provide a scientific justification for it, not just merely a religious one. So as people became more secular and began to believe less that the Bible and what was written in the Bible was the immutable truth, science stepped in to provide one more justification for racism. This justification was that by science, the European was meant to be superior. Science had ordained the white man with a burden, and the burden was to carry the world on their back, to bring truth and knowledge to the world. They were the inheritors of the earth, and the earth was their legacy. Certainly, that provided fuel to the fire of colonialism. And as Europeans went to North America, raped, killed, dominated, lied to, and committed genocide, I said genocide, against native peoples, as they did the same in the so-called Caribbean islands, as they did the same in South America, as they did the same in Oceania, as they tried to do the same in Asia, as they did the same in large parts of the continent of Africa, and how they did the same in places like the Arctic, which we don't often talk about, and as they did the same even in Europe, with many sets of non-white peoples who were present there and had been present there for thousands of years. So this ethnic cleansing of the planet needed to be justified. Otherwise, there's a great deal of emotional and spiritual guilt. There's a great deal of emotional and spiritual guilt, unless it can be justified. Science provided that justification. Science provided the support for that kind of notion. So in themselves, people like Darwin and Blumenbach were not necessarily the scientific racists that we now say that they are or were. Other people that came later, in the latter part of the 19th and the early 20th century, certainly were. Those Nazi scientists, Goebbels and others, who were doing scientific experiments on Africans in Namibia, slicing off the heads of Africans whilst they were still alive to see if the African felt pain, carrying out sexual tests on the Heroan and Namquara people to see if through the process of rape they could produce a white-skinned German Afro-European. This type of, inverted commas, quasi-science gave birth to the scientific racism of the Nazis. Those experiments gave rise to the hierarchy of races, in which the African was less than human. Intermession, or untermession, the filth, and other people of, inverted commas, Semitic blood were higher up, but nevertheless filth. And the Aryan, so-called Aryan, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, so-called Aryan, would be the superior master of the universe, and that the whole world was theirs. So this fueled, or was a kind of hyper-nationalism that fed off the nationalism and Eurocentrism of European nationalism during its colonial imperial conquest. People like Cecil Rhodes had a sort of idea like this when he committed the genocide that he did in Africa, in the Congo. Leopold, when he committed genocide of millions of Africans in the 19th century, did this on the justification that Belgium needed those resources and that the African was expendable because they were an inferior breed of people, genetically inferior. Yeah, but do we believe it? Do we as African people believe it? Have we taken on an identity? Most people of African descent say, no, I don't believe I'm inferior. I'm all right. It's all those other black people that are the problem. I haven't got a problem. I don't believe that. That's them. They've got all that negativity inside. I say every single one of us has it. Every single one of us has it. I have it. And I know you have it. Every one of us has it. And that negativity that we have, to a certain extent, there's a kind of inevitability to the negativity. I had a friend of mine, it's an interesting case because it helps to perhaps understand some things. There's this sister, she's the kind of sister that people would have said, oh, you're a strong black woman. She used to work in the city. She had natural hair. She had a big afro like this. She used to go into work in the city wearing, the kente cloth and the dashiki, and she was learning Swahili. She used to go regular trips to the continent of Africa. She used to spend her money supporting an African village and tell everybody about it. By the way, I'm supporting an African village. By the way, right? She used to read her ISIS papers and quote continuously from it. She was a vegan, vegetarian. She did all the things that, in inverted commas, you're supposed to do. But the hate was still there. So one time she was coming back from work, and a young man of African descent decided he was going to rob her and grabbed her bag. She was carrying a little small bag and tried to rob her. Grabbed it like this. But bearing in mind that this sister used to do yoga 4 or 5 times a week, self-defense in various forms, kickboxing and what have you, when he grabbed the bag, she said, what are you doing? Oh, God, no. She took the bag off him and punched him to the ground. And then when he was on the ground, she proceeded, she was wearing high heels, to step on his head and kick him and step on him. Right? The police came and stopped, got out of their car, proceeded to walk towards her and stopped. Let her finish, the policeman said. She was in the moment. I'm in the moment. She was in the moment. And as she was beating him, she was screaming out, I have to swear now, you black bastard, you black bastard, as she was becoming more and more excited about what she was doing. She looked at the policeman who had stopped, and she heard the one of them that said, let her finish, she's doing a good job. And then suddenly she had that, that epiphany, that spiritual moment. Oh my God, what am I doing? What have I become? As the youth, who wasn't more than 15 or 16, is in a disheveled, bloody heap. And then, to cap it all, when he'd been taken away, the police came and shook her hand. Good job, they said. Good job. Of course, she contacted me distraught. Oh, Onyeka, I don't know what came over me. As I was beating him, I actually enjoyed it. And I actually said, black bastard. And I enjoyed it. So what I'm saying is that this isn't just particular to her. This thing that we have inside is deep. Very, very, very deep. And for us to assume that we don't have it is very much naivety. It's impossible. We've grown up with Coronation Street. We've grown up with every single reference in the language in which we speak that refers to the colour of which we say we're part of as negative. Oh, it's a black day. Oh, it's a black lie. Oh, it's black night. Must be dangerous. Oh, that's very black. Must be bad. And everything that's white as good. Oh, this is a white lie. Oh, it's not quite so bad then. It's a white lie. Oh, I'm in white now. I must be innocent and perfect and beautiful because I'm dressed in white. And a bride gets married in white to show that they are a virgin. To show that they haven't been touched. So they put on the white. This is in our subconscious. When we see someone or we see something that we don't like, oh, that's dark. That's dark, man. It means it's bad. It means it's bad. So these things are in our subconscious. They're in our subconscious, I think, more deeply than it resides in Europeans. Because as a melanated people, And because of the menelin that we carry, if you're a Dr. Sabi fan, you'll say it's carbon, whatever it is, be it carbon or menelin. As a menelated, carbonated people, we keep things deep inside of us for very long periods of time, and we hold it inside, be it good or bad. And once hate of self has become part and parcel of your DNA, it's very, very hard as an African to remove it, because it's part and parcel of your DNA. So once we have absorbed it, and we've been absorbing it since we were born, even perhaps before then, because of the blood and the genetics of our parents, we're carrying that with us. We're carrying that with us. So in order to get it out of us, it's going to require a lot of work. Now, so this work is a daily thing. It's a daily thing, and it has to be so. And study and research must be part and parcel of it, and physical and mental, spiritual cleansing must also be part of it. As we begin to develop our processes of restoration and realization, we begin to uncover stuff about ourselves that we don't like. That's inevitable, that we uncover stuff about ourselves that we don't like. And as we do our cleansing isn't meant to be pleasant, it's meant to be cleansing. You may feel, oh, I don't want to jump through that hoop. But you have to. Not because I'm telling you, but because you do. I think that a key feature of moving forward is to make oneself economically independent. Economic independence is a fundamental thing. It's not easy. But economic independence is fundamentally also linked to a mental and spiritual independence. Without mental and spiritual independence, you can't be economically independent. People say, I want to start my own business. But starting your own business means getting up in the morning. Yeah, getting up in the morning is no thing. Yes, you think it's no thing. When you have a job, when you're in a job, getting up for work is considerably easier because you know there's other people waiting for you. But when entirely your endeavors are entirely reliant upon yourself, getting up requires your own self-motivation of self to do that which is necessary, which is an entirely different thing. So economic independence is entirely linked to mental and spiritual development. And merely the seeking of economic wealth without a mental or spiritual independence is fruitless. It's fruitless. So as one begins to adopt whichever philosophy one has to move forward, that philosophy needs to be shaped by the consciousness of survival, and not only survival, but moving towards living and moving towards growing. One must know the soil in which one grows, and one must know the right food to eat in order to grow. One must have the right atmosphere, and one must know the conditions of any predators that might come and stop your growing. The challenges that people of African descent have are the challenges that all human beings have, but heightened, excited by the condition of our situation. I wouldn't be anything other than what I am. I wouldn't be anything other than what I am. The reason why you are what you are is because you're supposed to be that thing that you are. It is not a mistake. Nobody that is living is the result of a mistake, even if you weren't planned. The fact that you exist means that it wasn't a mistake. So do not feel that your existence is a mistake or who you are is a mistake. You've got to understand why you are who you are and what you are, and what that thing is that you are is supposed to do. So how am I meant to navigate my way through this spiritual universe being the creature that I am?